This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform for building a website. More details on them later. Let there be floods of blood in the bourgeoisie, more blood, as much as possible. With these words, a newspaper published by the Soviet Red Army welcomed the rains of blood sweeping through Russia in late 1918. It was a period which became known as the Red Terror, the systematic elimination of anyone who could pose a threat to the recently established Soviet government. The engine behind the Red Terror was the feared CheKa, the first secret police force established by Vladimir Lenin's Bolshevik Revolution, an organization which would later evolve into the feared KGB. And at the head and heart of the CheKa, there stood one man, staunchly loyal to communism and single-minded in his relentless suppression of the enemies of the state. This is the story of Ion Felix Dzerzhinsky. Felix Dzerzhinsky was born on August 30th, 1877, according to the Julian calendar, or September 11th, according to the Gregorian calendar. His birthplace was the town of Dzerzhinovo, modern-day Belarus, back then part of the Russian Empire. Felix was the sixth of 8 children born to Edmund, a Jewish gymnasium teacher, and Helena, the daughter of Professor Januszewski, a Polish nobleman. Edmund had been hired by Januszewski to tutor his daughters. While Edmund did tutor them, he also did so in the most inappropriate manner. The 25-year-old Edmund seduced the 14-year-old Helena, and the two were forced to marry. While being pregnant with her 6th child, Helena had a bad fall and was at risk of miscarrying. Her baby was born prematurely, but miraculously healthy. Hence, his parents decided to name him Felix, meaning happy or lucky in Latin. But this lucky child would soon become fatherless, as Edmund died of tuberculosis in 1882. Helena took great care of Felix and his siblings' education, raising them as Catholics. Little Felix was so taken up by religious teachings that he expressed a desire to become a priest. At the age of 13, Felix was sent to study in a boarding school in Vilnius, modern-day Lithuania, also part of the Russian Empire. As he grew older, he lost interest in academics and religion and developed an antagonistic streak towards the stifling autocratic rule of the Tsar. He was more interested in learning about the conditions of the working class, eventually developing a fascination with Marxist ideology. At the age of 17, Felix joined an underground Marxist group, which put him under scrutiny from education authorities. When he publicly insulted and slapped a German teacher, that was the last straw, and he was expelled from his gymnasium. After the expulsion, Felix became an active propagandist on behalf of a social democratic revolutionary group, which advocated the overthrow of the Tsar, as well as Polish and Lithuanian independence. The young firebrand spread the word of communism among factory workers and students, an activity which earned him his first arrest in 1897. Felix was first imprisoned at the Kaunas prison in Lithuania, and in August 1898, he was sent in internal exile in Nolinsk, 900 kilometers northeast of Moscow. There, he found employment in a tobacco factory, and despite constant police supervision, Felix managed to stay in contact with his comrades back in Poland and Lithuania. He also organized frequent political meetings with fellow workers, which eventually prompted his second forced relocation to CheKa, 430 kilometers north of Nolinsk. It was December, and temperatures plummeted to 40 degrees Celsius below zero. Dzerzhinsky endured inhuman conditions, and a medical examination in February found him to be on the verge of death. But the resolute revolutionary pulled through, and as spring came, he started his plan to escape. Felix took up hunting, embarking on long trips in the woods. His police escort had a hard time tailing him, but the budding hunter always returned home. By August 1899, the police escort had got used to this routine, and that's when Felix left for good. Dzerzhinsky sailed a boat along the Kama River, then boarded a train and reached Vilnius in September before the police even had time to issue a warrant for his arrest. During late 1899 and early 1900, Felix worked hard to unite the social democrat movements of Lithuania and Poland. In January, he traveled to Warsaw to set up a clandestine printing press, but on the 23rd, he was arrested a second time. After incarceration in Warsaw in January 1902, Dzerzhinsky was transferred to Moscow, and from there, he was to be deported to the motherland of exile and suffering, Eastern Siberia. In February 1902, Felix was taken to Irkutsk, north of the border with Mongolia. There, he and other political prisoners were placed in a temporary facility awaiting transfer to another destination. But weeks and months dragged on, and the exiles sent a letter to the prison superintendent demanding to know what fate awaited them. No reply came. In May, the facility became overcrowded with an influx of violent common criminals. Felix interpreted this as a move by the authorities to intimidate the political prisoners and decided to launch a preemptive strike. As per established prison law, he picked the biggest, meanest-looking convict, walked up to him, and knocked him out cold. Then his fellow comrades surrounded the common criminals and threatened to launch an all-out battle. The prison superintendent arrived just in time to prevent a riot, but it was only a temporary respite. On the morning of May the 6th, Felix led his comrades into a mutiny. They overpowered the guards and raised a red flag over the prison walls, declaring Irkutsk a free republic. The police and the army surrounded the prison, but authorities in St. Petersburg advised the local governor to settle the matter peacefully. After protracted talks with Dzerzhinsky, the governor agreed to the prisoners' demands, which were essentially to be taken out of the prison and into their place of exile. The governor yielded, and on the 12th of May, a transport was arranged towards Yakutsk, some 3,000 kilometers to the northeast. At a halfway stop, Dzerzhinsky feigned illness, and on June the 12th, he gave the police the slip once more. By the 29th, he was back in Warsaw. Felix may have pulled a sickie on his latest evasion, but he had actually contracted tuberculosis sometime in the early 1900s. Despite this illness, he worked tirelessly in 1902 and 1903. He founded newspapers, traveled to Krakow, Berlin, and Switzerland, all the while climbing the ranks of the Social Democrat movement and advocating unity amongst all revolutionary movements within the Russian Empire. During this intense period of activity, he also became an admirer of the works and ideals of another rising star in the Marxist constellation, one Vladimir Lenin. In January 1904, the Russo-Japanese War broke out. Lenin's view was that a Tsarist defeat would hasten the fall of autocracy. Dzerzhinsky agreed and intensified his efforts in spreading anti-Tsarist propaganda, as well as organizing anti-war strikes and demonstrations. On January 9, 1905, Russian troops shot and killed peaceful demonstrators in St. Petersburg, which ignited the First Russian Revolution. News spread quickly to Warsaw, and Felix was at the center of revolutionary activity by disseminating leaflets, organizing party cadres, and training detachments of armed workers. This effort culminated on May the 1st with a massive demonstration which degenerated into another bloodbath. Dzerzhinsky was not deterred and organized an interregional Social Democrat Party conference on July the 17th to plan further action. But the police got wind of it and raided the meeting premises, arresting Felix for the third time. Look, are you a creator looking to present your work online? Would you like an online presence that looks neat and professional, yet still unique for your brand? Then today's sponsor, Squarespace, is the perfect solution for you, as they provide an all-in-one platform for building the website of your dreams. Choose from stunning templates that can be tailored within minutes to reflect your creativity and personal brand or style. With more than 40 design options, every website will look perfect on any device due to Squarespace's mobile-ready and responsive designs. Creating a website from scratch has never been easier or quicker with Squarespace's easy drag-and-drop feature. You can do text, photos, galleries, and much more without any complicated coding. Want to maximize your content in a way that reflects your brand identity? Well, Squarespace members feature makes this simple and easy, allowing you to unlock a new revenue stream by offering exclusive access to gated content for your most loyal customers. Every website also comes equipped with built-in SEO tools like meta descriptions and keywords, which guarantee that search engines can find and properly index your content quickly. Also, there's automatic backups, ensuring all your publishing activities are secure and up to date at all times, while their top-quality hosting platform provides fast loading speeds on all devices, regardless of geographic location or connection type. They also offer 24/7 customer support, along with their extensive library of how-to videos ranging from customizing elements to developing more complicated integration strategies. So check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch your new website, go to squarespace.com/biographics to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain and start building your online presence today. And now back to today's video. This time, freedom came courtesy of Tsar Nicholas II, who granted limited reforms in October and an amnesty in November. Nonetheless, Dzerzhinsky did not trust the Tsar's concessions and urged his comrades to take up arms and act with arms in our hands. In early 1906, Dzerzhinsky focused on propaganda work, spreading revolutionary ideals amongst farm laborers and infantry soldiers, two sectors thus far ignored by socialist agitators. This incessant work brought him respect and notoriety among the cadres of the Russian Social Democratic Labour Party, the RSDLP, who invited him to their congress in Stockholm in April 1906. It was at this conference that Dzerzhinsky first met in person with Lenin. From then on, they would be lifelong friends and collaborators. Felix saw in Lenin a teacher and a natural leader. Lenin saw in Felix a relentless supporter, a brave man of action who could enact his vision by driving revolution in the Polish territories. Dzerzhinsky did not disappoint. In December 1906, he was at the forefront of a protest against a factory lockout in Lodz, central Poland, a protest followed by his fourth arrest. While in jail, Felix was elected as a member of the RSDLP's Central Committee. He was now a big shot in the party and was able to celebrate upon his release on bail in May 1907. But as his visibility increased, so did his chances to be arrested by the Ochrana, the feared Tsar's secret police. In fact, Dzerzhinsky was seized once more on April 3, 1908, and later sentenced to be exiled for life in Siberia. By now, Felix was a pro at escaping the clutches of the Russian police. On November 23, 1909, he quietly left the remote village of Tyasevo, and apparently his guards noticed only 3 months later. By then, Dzerzhinsky was enjoying the warm sun and fresh breeze of Capri, southern Italy, alongside fellow revolutionary Maxim Gorky. After the brief break, Dzerzhinsky returned to Poland, where he resumed his underground activity, trying to escape the grasp of the Ochrana. The revolutionary also found time for more pleasant pursuits, as he met and fell in love with fellow party member Sofia Muscat. The two married in August 1910 and were soon expecting their first child. In December 1910, however, Sofia was arrested and sentenced to exile. Before departing for Siberia, she gave birth to their son, Jan, in June 1911. Felix was always on the move, so Jan was entrusted to Sofia's father. Dzerzhinsky, nonetheless, tried to visit his son as often as possible. It was during one of these visits that he narrowly evaded yet another Ochrana raid. But it was only a matter of time before the secret police finally caught him, and Felix was arrested yet again at the end of 1912. For the next 4 years, Dzerzhinsky was kept under a strict prison regime, first in Warsaw, then in Oyel, and finally in Moscow. There was no hope of escaping now, as the revolutionary was kept in chains most of the time and suffered frequent beatings. Meanwhile, in the outside world, the Great War had broken out. The incompetent conduct in the war by Tsar Nicholas II exacerbated the discontent of his subjects until tensions erupted in the February Revolution of 1917. Dzerzhinsky and other socialist and communist agitators were released from prison, but this was not yet the main revolution that they were planning for. Sure, the Tsar had been ousted and replaced by the provisional government of social democratic lawyer Alexander Kerensky, but Kerensky was a moderate, unwilling to enact the radical reforms advocated by Lenin and eager to keep Russia in the war. The big upheaval finally took place with the October Revolution, when Vladimir Lenin and his Bolshevik supporters overthrew Kerensky's government and firmly took power. Well, maybe not so firmly. Lenin's revolutionary government was at risk of collapsing in its very first few weeks of existence. The German and Austro-Hungarian empires held parts of Ukraine and the Baltic states. A counter-revolutionary force known as the White Army formed in southern Russia and Siberia, prompting the start of the Russian Civil War. Reactionary saboteurs roamed the streets of Moscow and Petrograd. Socialist factions not aligned to the Bolsheviks threatened to wrest power from Lenin and his comrades. And to top it all off, peasant revolts erupted within Bolshevik-controlled territory. This atmosphere of actual or perceived threats prompted Lenin and his government to create a special unit to root out the enemies of the revolution. This was called the All-Russian Extraordinary Commission for Combating Counter-Revolution and Sabotage, or more simply, the Extraordinary Commission, known by its Russian acronym, CheKa. The first Soviet secret police and secret service was born on December 20th, 1917, and its primary goal was to put on trial in the Revolutionary Tribunal those who had committed sabotage acts and the counter-revolutionaries, and to develop methods for fighting them. Lenin himself appointed the chairman of this new unit. He was after a man of action, one fanatically devoted to the ideals of the revolution. And no spoilers here, but the choice fell on Comrade Dzerzhinsky. After being the target of a pervasive secret police unit, the Ochrana, for much of his adult life, Dzerzhinsky would soon unleash his own operatives against his enemies. But the head of the CheKa had a daunting task ahead, considering that he was initially assigned only 12 operatives under his command. All the Chekists could do in their first days in operation was to prevent liquor stores in Moscow from being looted. However, Dzerzhinsky soon expanded the ranks of the CheKa, recruiting new members from the best and brightest amongst the Red Guards. He then concentrated the efforts of the CheKa in crushing the socialist revolutionary movement. This was considered to be the main opposition to the Bolshevik government. Already in these early days of action, Dzerzhinsky clearly laid out what were his favorite methods and what his police force stood for. Quote, "We stand for organized terror. This should be frankly admitted. Terror is an absolute necessity during times of revolution. Our aim is to fight against the enemies of the Soviet government and of the new order of life." The socialist revolutionaries responded by staging a street demonstration in Petrograd in July 1918. Dzerzhinsky was not amused and he unleashed his Chekists against the protesters. Firefights erupted and 350 demonstrators were killed in the riots. On August the 17th, the socialist revolutionaries retaliated by assassinating Moses Uritsky, head of Petrograd's CheKa section. Dzerzhinsky could not forgive the killing of one of his most trusted men. He left Moscow in haste and descended upon Petrograd, eventually tracking down and arresting the assassin, Leonid Kanagaisa. Initially, Lenin was against extracting violent retribution on Kanagaisa, but he soon changed his mind. On August the 30th, someone fired 3 shots against Lenin's car in Moscow, wounding him in the neck and shoulder. The shooter was identified as Fanny Kaplan, a former supporter of the revolution, now disillusioned with the Bolsheviks. Kanagaisa and Kaplan were executed, and many, many more deaths would follow. Lenin, his government, and his security apparatus could not tolerate such blatant attacks on their authority. On September the 2nd, Dzerzhinsky and the CheKa issued the Red Terror Order, a set of directives to arrest a wide array of enemies of the state. Targets included members of socialist non-Bolshevik parties, industrialists, entrepreneurs, merchants, landowners, members of the clergy, and military officers, as well as their next of kin. Chekists were ordered to imprison these hostile elements in forced labor camps, the early incarnation of the infamous Gulag system. But Dzerzhinsky also authorized his men to summarily execute anyone who resisted arrest. By early October 1918, Dzerzhinsky's Chekists had arrested more than 7,000 alleged enemies of the state, of which 800 were summarily executed. And this was in Petrograd alone. From his hospital bed, Lenin urged Dzerzhinsky to ramp up the brutality of the killings and to favor public hangings to send a message to the trembling citizens. Besides hangings, the Chekists distinguished themselves by the variety of methods applied to the killings. Most victims were first stripped of all valuables, including gold teeth, which were distributed among the secret police agents. Then they were liquidated with a bullet to the head in a cellar or garage. If the targets were believed to be sympathizers of the White Army, they were burned alive, drowned in rivers, or hacked to death. To perpetrate the most brutal killings or acts of torture, Dzerzhinsky encouraged the recruitment of sexual deviants and psychopaths, many of whom were raised to senior positions within the CheKa. The Red Terror Order was officially enforced until the end of October 1918, although Dzerzhinsky's acolytes continued to perpetrate mass killings until the end of the Russian Civil War in June 1923. During September and October, the death toll throughout Bolshevik-controlled Russia had risen to 15,000 confirmed casualties, but the unofficial nature of the massacres makes it impossible to estimate a precise number. Likely, up to 200,000 citizens died at the hands of the CheKa during its first years in operation. Whilst Chekists were busy rounding up and executing enemies of the state, Felix Dzerzhinsky worked tirelessly from his headquarters in Lubyanka Square, Moscow. The head of the CheKa barely survived on a diet of mint tea and bread, compiling endless lists of targets for imprisonment or elimination. It was this type of selfless dedication to the cause of Bolshevism which earned him the nickname of Iron Felix. And Iron Felix expected a similar dedication from his agents, working them to the brink of human capacity. Several Chekists collapsed from exhaustion and were immediately dismissed from the force. Only those who kept up with the boss's stamina could aspire to rise through the ranks and be hailed as model Chekists. Without a hint of irony, Dzerzhinsky described these as men with a warm heart, a cool head, and clean hands. In late 1921, the Bolshevik government was on its way to victory against the White Russian armies. Lenin and his People's Commissars felt more secure in their seats of power and decided to scale back the state of emergency. As a result, CheKa, the Extraordinary Commission, was closed down and replaced by a new security organization, still under Dzerzhinsky as its chairman. Iron Felix's new force was founded in February 1922 with the name of State Political Administration, known by its Russian acronym GPU. In November 1923, the GPU became the OGPU, or Joint State Political Administration. And in between those dates, in April 1923, Dzerzhinsky found the time to create a sporting association dedicated to members of the GPU and the Red Army. The Dynamo Moscow later spawned professional clubs across 17 different sports, including football, basketball, and ice hockey. Dzerzhinsky and his operatives were now placed under stricter control, having to report to the Ministry of the Interior. This meant that the OGPU was not free any longer to execute at will their targets, but they continued to relentlessly hunt down enemies of the state. Since Joseph Stalin's appointment as General Secretary of the Communist Party in 1922, the list of enemies included internal political rivals such as Leon Trotsky and his sympathizers. Iron Felix was all too happy to align himself with the Man of Steel, and he became his enforcer to this end. But the OGPU continued to crack down on old classic adversaries, namely spies from Western powers. One of Dzerzhinsky's masterstrokes was the elimination of Georgy Rosenblum, aka Sidney Riley, aka the Ace of Spies, a Russian-born adventurer in the employ of British secret services. Riley had been involved in previous plots to assassinate Lenin and was believed to be an active danger to the Soviet government. Under Dzerzhinsky's direction, OGPU agent Alexander Yakushev created a fake underground group, the Monarchist Association of Central Russia, ostensibly aimed at murdering Bolshevik leaders. Yakushev's bogus group invited Riley to the Soviet Union, and the spy fell into the trap. The Ace of Spies was arrested by the OGPU on September 26, 1925, while he was crossing the Finnish border. Riley was then taken to Lubyanka headquarters for questioning. While he initially refused to cooperate, he eventually wrote a letter to Dzerzhinsky offering to betray British and American secret agents operating in Russia. It was not clear whether Dzerzhinsky accepted this offer, but what is certain is what happened next. Riley's execution on November 5th, following direct orders from Stalin. Clearly, the all-powerful Soviet dictator had no qualms in executing enemies, but he occasionally appeared to greatly care about his most trusted collaborators, and Dzerzhinsky was one of them. Since February 1924, Iron Felix the workaholic had added several job titles to his resume. He had been elected member of the Politburo, the Soviet Communist Party's policymaking body. He had been appointed chairman of the Supreme Council of the National Economy of the Soviet Union, in charge of coordinating economic management bodies at local and national levels. And he still performed his duties as chairman of the OGPU, traveling across the Soviet Union, personally reviewing the effectiveness of the force's lower branches. Such was his workload that Stalin was concerned about Dzerzhinsky's health. The leader ordered him to cut down his to-do list and seek medical attention. In fact, throughout 1924 and 1925, Iron Felix mostly focused his attention on economic and social projects. One of his most successful projects was the creation of a network of institutions to look after children orphaned during the Civil War. His orphanages and children's communes provided free medical care, food, and education to children who otherwise would have lived in the streets. Despite Stalin's advice to take it easy, it appears that a hectic schedule eventually took its toll on Iron Felix. On July 20th, 1926, Felix Dzerzhinsky delivered a 2-hour-long speech to the Politburo, thundering against the Trotskyist faction. Shortly after his talk, Dzerzhinsky collapsed suddenly, stricken by a fatal heart attack. Iron Felix had been the head of the first incarnations of the Soviet secret police and secret service agencies for a little over 8 years, and yet his legacy would be felt for decades as successors of the CheKa and the OGPU continued to enact his ruthless methods. In 1934, the OGPU became the NKVD, which later became the MGB, and finally in 1954 the KGB, the three-letter acronym which plagued the nightmares of Western intelligence agencies during the Cold War. 4 years after the inception of the KGB in 1958, the legacy of Felix Dzerzhinsky himself was honored by Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev with the unveiling of a colossal statue in Lubyanka Square in Moscow. Iron Felix, now memorialized in granite, could keep an eternal watch over the headquarters of the agency that he had founded and directed. Soviet propaganda had enshrined his status as a hero of the revolution who had protected the young people's government from its adversaries. But Russian citizens saw him in a different light. Unsurprisingly, as the Soviet Union was crumbling in August 1991, his statue was one of the first icons of the regime to be taken down.